the Banished were forged as an inevitable consequence of the compounding lies and deceit of the Covenant leadership. All it took was an individual of influence and with an astute enough mind to notice these inconsistencies that are inherent to pathological liars, and a resentment of these lies driving them to action. Atriox is that individual. Atriox is that mind. He is that action. The systemic racism that boiled over and led to the Great Schism was not present within the minds of those who forged the Banished. While it has been confirmed the Banished are to be a major component and faction to encounter in the near future, they are not the conventional bad guys, as their actions are not seated in evil for the sake of evil. Rather, a simple difference in ideologies with an exponential growth in numbers, power and influence as a consequence of the power vacuum left in the wake of the breaking of the Covenant. It isn't surprising then that other factions that come across the Banished for the first time wrongly assume they are simply the next splinter faction of the old Covenant, when all it takes is a look into their origins and their journey to their current situation to see how the very foundations of their alliance makes them a powerful and altogether very appealing alliance to get involved with. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00. This is part 2 of the 4-part Banished Mini Series. We've already covered brute power armor up to the end of the Human Covenant War as part 1 of this series. If you haven't seen it, there's a link in the description and at the end of this video. In part 3, we will do a mini most detailed breakdown on the Banished powered exoskeletons, and in part 4, we will look at the weapons of the Banished. But today, in part 2, we look at the history and origins of the Banished. I am fully aware that my fellow Halo YouTubers have already covered this subject extensively in recent weeks, but I wanted to take a look at their history from an ideological point of view as opposed to the raw lore of their origins. I wanted to put my own spin on it, so join me as we take a look at the history and origins of the Banished and their ideological differences that make them so powerful. Let's do this. The Banished formed in the latter years of the Human Covenant War by Atriox and some of his pack brothers. Atriox's clan was used by the Covenant as disposable shock troops. 40 brutes were sent as the first wave against entrenched forces. These 40 brutes would be faced with nearly impossible odds of survival, as their purpose was to break the enemy lines and provide significant enough distraction to buy time for a larger secondary attack force to close on the enemy position, while simultaneously softening up the forces and thus lightening the load for the secondary attack force. Ironically, this secondary attack force was often led by elites. Their claimed military superiority and highly trained and honed fighting capabilities would thus not be tested to the extreme by being the first into battle, instead opting to send members of a race they deemed inferior in battle prowess to war ahead of them, softening the resistance enough to be more easily dealt with when they did finally arrive on the scene of battle. This was born of a disregard of the qualities of the constituent species that permeated every corner of the Covenant. Sending 40 brutes at a time to die as cannon fodder simply to make the lives of the elites easier was a normal aspect of the Covenant's modus operandi. These acts of racial prejudice and resentment were rife within the Covenant, from the absolute upper echelons of the Covenant hierarchy all the way down to the strained relationships between grunts and jackals. Indeed, racism is practically written into the Covenant. The prophets and elites warred with each other over differing ideologies. The Covenant was founded on lies, and every race integrated thereafter were done so after their near genocide. And these integrations to serve particular roles within the Covenant upset the balance of society for those already within the Covenant. This led to prolific distrust and resentment between the species of the Covenant. Grunts hated jackals and vice versa. Drones hated engineers, elites hated brutes and barely tolerated the existence of the lesser races. Hunters disregarded the existence of practically all races with the exception of the elites and the prophets manipulated and disrespected all of the races. It was quite literally systemic. The brutes were not, by any extent of the imagination, the only species to be used as cannon fodder. We know this from the grunts. But were simply the only race confident, powerful, and dangerous enough to actually mount an effective rebellion. The grunts had rebelled in the past, but when threatened with their homeworld being glassed, they relented and accepted defeat, although it did earn them the right to use weapons. From conflict to conflict, battle to battle, colony to colony, 40 brutes at a time were sacrificed. These missions involved charging headlong into entrenched enemy positions, facing the combined fire and attention of the entirety of the enemy force. This speaks to the brutes' sheer power and resilience that they actually managed on most occasions to break the enemy lines. However, these missions also carried a 100% mortality rate. No brute sent into battle on that first line ever returned. None until Atriox. He was the first to return, and due to the continued resentment between the elites and the brutes, he was sent back in with the next battle with 39 of his brothers, and only he returned again. Battle after battle went on like this. Judging by the tally marks on the hilt of his hammer, he returned from at least 10 battles, but likely significantly more, as there may be more tally marks around the hilt. That means, at a minimum, Atriox saw 400 of his kind die needlessly as expendable muscle, fighting for the lie that is the Covenant, for the lie that dying in battle would speed their great journey into the divine beyond. At least 400 of his brothers dying for a religion they were forced to follow. 400 dead and only him returning. Every single battle, watching his brothers die, forged a hatred for the Covenant and his elite masters, until the day he could no longer tolerate it. The fall of the Covenant had no negative side effects to this new band of pirates. In the years leading up to the very end of the Human Covenant War, the Banished conducted numerous raids and strikes against isolated Covenant targets while scavenging resources, weapons, vehicles and ships at every opportunity. Their success at this time likely gained them a following of loyal warriors from every walk of life. When the Covenant finally did break and the war came to an end, the power vacuum caused as a consequence had nothing but beneficial effects on the Banished. Weapons, resources and ships aplenty were ripe for capture. The thousands of displaced warriors left over from the war, including large swathes of the brute culture, were inevitably looking for a place to continue fighting and remain useful. And the Banished welcomed these warriors honestly and with open arms. No stipulations, no religion, no lies. Just an understanding that any bloodshed and any treasures are seized in the name of their own free will and nothing more. During this time, some elites continued hunting and killing brutes out of hatred and vengeance for their actions during the Great Schism under the orders of the prophets. Risa Azavel's Silent Shadow Division in particular had been killing brute packs across various solar systems. They managed to board Atriox's SDV-class heavy corvette, Elegy's Lament. They began killing any brute crewman they came across until they found Atriox. Rather than mount a strike to kill the Silent Shadows, Atriox spoke to them. He explained they were not the same as the brutes of the Covenant, once led by Tartarus. They were not the same brutes who had betrayed and slaughtered the elites during the Great Schism. The squad of Silent Shadows began seeing the Banished not as targets, but as something other. As Atriox continued, the motivations of the Silent Shadows shifted. He explained they should rejoice that the Covenant had finally fallen, and that they should join him and his Banished. Risa, their leader, still held on to this hatred and indicated he still wanted revenge. Atriox countered that vengeance was petty, as vengeance has no reward. Risa attacked Atriox, but before he could do so, his own squad, his fellow Silent Shadows, attacked and killed him. Atriox welcomed them into the Banished. This proved that not only was Atriox different from other brutes, but also that he didn't harbour the same resentments. It proved he was an intelligent and honest leader, a brute true to his word. This was not an isolated incident. Atriox and the Banished went on to convince many elites, even ones particularly lost to vengeance, to join the Banished. Only in a very few circumstances did the Banished need to levy any degree of force to convince people to join. Let Valir, shipmaster of the CAS-class assault carrier enduring conviction, was one circumstance a small degree of force was required. Upon the ship arriving to defend a base under siege by the Banished, Atriox was groundside, fighting in the battle. A second Banished force covertly boarded the nearly vacant ship and waited on board. As the siege failed on the ground, as was the plan, Atriox surrendered to Let and was taken aboard as a prisoner. Upon reaching the bridge, Atriox had his stowaway forces reveal themselves, turning the tables and taking control of the ship. But again, Atriox simply talked to Let and offered him a chance to join them rather than continue fighting the feud between brutes and elites. Let accepted and later swore loyalty to Atriox and the Banished. In a true display of polar opposite ideologies, Atriox sent chieftains with divisions of brutes to brute colonies and human criminal organizations, likely including the United Rebel Front. Here, they built connections and spread their influence far and wide. Atriox and the Banished's willingness to work with other species, including humanity, was a true testament to their ideological differences to the Covenant and their openness for cooperation in the spirit of free will. And it really wouldn't be surprising in the slightest to even find humans amongst their ranks in Halo Infinite. Over the coming years, the Banished would grow tremendously in size, power, and influence. The vast majority of their forces remaining relatively unheard of to the UNSC and humanity at large. That is until 2559, when the enduring conviction arrived at the Ark outpost on Installation 00. It is unknown the exact motivations of the attack, but no human survivors were left. Shortly after this, the Spirit of Fire arrived at the Ark and encountered Atriox for the first time. Despite Atriox's history of being able to convince people to join the cause, Atriox instead chose to indulge his brute fury and staged an ambush on 3 Spartan 2s of Red Team, and in so doing, ruthlessly overpowered and dominated all 3 Spartans simultaneously and severely injured Douglas to the point of loss of consciousness. He did this on his own. And so the occupation of the Ark began, bringing us to the events of Halo Wars 2 and soon the events of Halo Infinite. The Banished are a force unlike anything we have yet seen. While at the face of it they are simply a splinter faction of the Covenant following one brute warlord, when you understand and appreciate how their ideologies differ from the Covenant's, and how effortlessly the Banished recruited willing individuals to their cause, you begin to understand how powerful they really are. Any leader with the ability to convince people to set aside their differences, to shun their prejudices, resentment, and vengeance centuries old, and all work together for a common goal, is a leader to be respected and feared in equal measure. Oddly, there is much we could learn from Atriox, much that is painfully relevant in recent times. I'm extremely excited to see what the Banished bring to Infinite, and how their emergence is going to affect the state and balance of power in the galaxy. but only time will tell. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below. I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons: Neek the Silent Cartographer, Brian Sebastian, Red Sea Darian, Stalker of the Realms, Falcon X003, Alvin DW, Flaming Halo, and the Revanche, the Holders of the Mantle, my glorious Reclaimers, my loyal Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome, and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and that little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord. And if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo-related goodness. Take it easy, everyone, and find peace in the domain.